Her sister's life was slipping away, her own freedom stolen, framed for a crime she didn't commit. The terrifying billionaire who'd claimed her merely watched as they dragged her away. But the city's ruthless mafia boss doesn't let go of what's his. He ignited an inferno of vengeance, tearing down empires to reclaim her. Now she's safe, but eternally bound to his dark, dangerous world. The scent of turpentine and aged canvas was Clara Evans's sanctuary, a thin veil separating her from the suffocating reality outside the art restoration studio at Thorne & Company. Auction house. It clung to her threadbare apron, permeated her skin, and even, she sometimes imagined, coated the lining of her lungs, a constant reminder of the fragile balance between passion and survival. Tonight, the silence of the cavernous studio, usually a balm, felt like a heavy shroud. Outside, the city hummed, a distant, indifferent beast. Her hands, slender and surprisingly strong for their delicate work, trembled slightly as she applied a microdrop of a carefully mixed solvent to the corner of a centuries-old portrait. The work demanded absolute precision, an almost meditative focus, yet her mind was a whirlwind of anxieties. Mia? Always Mia? Her younger sister's face, pale and etched with the telltale weariness of her rare genetic illness, floated behind Clara's eyelids, a hauntingly beautiful specter. Mia's medical bills were a towering inferno, threatening to consume everything Clara had. Every envelope from St. Jude's Children's Hospital was a fresh stab to her gut, each digit on the balance a crushing weight. The experimental treatment, their last desperate hope, was a financial black hole. And then there was Mia's arts scholarship, a prestigious, fiercely competitive award that offered her sister a chance at a normal life, a future beyond hospital beds and sterile hallways. Clara couldn't let that slip away. But even scholarships had their hidden costs: equipment, specialized materials, the unexpected emergencies that always seemed to strike when her bank account was at its most skeletal. Clara sighed, the sound lost in the vastness of the studio. Her fingers, accustomed to the delicate dance of brush and pigment, tightened around the tiny scalpel. She traced the hairline fracture on the canvas, a tiny scar on the face of a forgotten duchess. She understood that kind of hidden damage, the cracks that ran deep beneath a seemingly perfect surface. This particular portrait, a small, unassuming piece tucked away in a dusty corner of her apartment, wasn't from Thorne & Company. It was hers. A family heirloom, passed down through generations, its true value long overlooked, its beauty obscured by layers of grime and neglect. It depicted a young woman, her eyes wide with a melancholy wisdom, a sprig of nightshade clutched in her hand. Clara felt an uncanny kinship with the subject, a shared burden of unspoken sorrow. This painting was her last gamble, her secret project, a desperate prayer whispered into the silence of the night. If she could meticulously restore it, unearth its original brilliance, perhaps, just perhaps, it could fetch enough at a small, independent auction to cover Mia's next round of treatment. It was a long shot, a dream she cradled close to her chest, hidden from Mr. Thorne's sharp, calculating eyes. Mr. Thorne. The name itself left a bitter taste on her tongue. Arthur Thorne, owner and proprietor of Thorne & Company, a man whose charisma was as slick as the polished marble floors of his gallery, and whose smile rarely reached his cold, appraising eyes. He saw art and people as commodities. Clara was acutely aware she was merely another tool in his arsenal, a gifted but easily replaceable cog in his lucrative machine. Earlier that day, Thorne had glided into the studio, his bespoke suit rustling with self-importance, a faint scent of expensive cologne preceding him. "Clara, dear," he purred, his voice dripping with condescension disguised as charm. "That piece for the upcoming quarterly auction. The Rubens attribution. Are you certain you can get it done by Friday?" Clara had nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, Mr. Thorne. I've already adjusted the varnish." He'd merely hummed, his gaze sweeping over her workstation, lingering on the subtle tremor in her hands. "Good. Don't disappoint me. We have important clients attending this one. People who value perfection." The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air, a reminder of her precarious position. He thrived on subtle intimidation, a master of psychological pressure, knowing exactly which nerves to hit. He'd made it clear that her job, her privilege, was entirely dependent on her unwavering, unquestioning obedience. Clara remembered the day she started, fresh out of art school, brimming with naive hope. Thorne had promised a mentorship, a chance to work on masterpieces. Instead, she found herself working tirelessly on lesser pieces, while he took credit for her most inspired restorations, his name gracing every prominent attribution. Her talent was simply another resource for him to exploit, her dreams systematically chipped away by the relentless tide of his ambition. She ran a gloved fingertip over the rough texture of her heirloom's canvas. Her own portrait, so unlike the grand, opulent pieces Thorne showcased. This was raw, honest, imbued with a quiet resilience. It mirrored her own spirit, one she fought desperately to keep alive. The meager salary Thorne paid her barely covered rent and basic groceries, let alone Mia's escalating medical costs. Every night, after the last curator had left and the heavy oak doors of Thorne and Company were locked, Clara would return to the hushed studio. She'd pull out her hidden painting, setting it up under the focused beam of her restoration lamp, working until her eyes blurred and her back ached. It was a secret act of rebellion, a desperate hope against the crushing weight of her reality. The silence of the night was broken only by the soft brush of her tools against the canvas, the occasional distant siren, and the frantic pounding of her own heart. She was tired, exhausted to her bones, a deep weariness that sleep barely touched. But she couldn't give up. Not when Mia's future, her very life, hung in such a delicate balance. Mia, with her vibrant imagination and sparkling eyes, deserved more than a life confined to hospital rooms. She deserved to chase her own artistic dreams, unburdened by the crushing reality of their financial abyss. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the despair wash over her, a cold, dark wave. She pictured herself adrift, a tiny boat on a vast, unforgiving ocean. But then, a flicker of defiance sparked within her. She wasn't just a boat. She was a shipwreck survivor, clinging to a fragile piece of driftwood, determined to swim. For Mia. She reopened her eyes, a renewed, steely resolve hardening her gaze. The heirloom painting seemed to shimmer under the lamp, a silent promise. This was her last chance. As she reached for a finer brush, a faint scraping sound echoed from the far end of the vast, dimly lit studio. A chill ran down her spine, prickling the hairs on her arms. Had someone else stayed late? Or worse, had someone returned? Her breath hitched, fear a cold knot in her stomach. She was alone, isolated, vulnerable. And yet, she couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that she wasn't quite as alone as she thought. A shadow shifted near a towering sculpture draped in canvas, too tall, too silent to be a stray gust of wind. The scraping sound from the shadows intensified, pulling Clara from her work, every nerve suddenly taut. It was too late for any other employee to be here, and the cleaning crew usually came much earlier. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the silence. Just a draft, she tried to rationalize, but the air in the vast studio felt unnaturally heavy, charged with an unseen presence. She gripped the delicate scalpel in her hand, its sharp edge a tiny, useless comfort. She slowly turned, her gaze sweeping across the cavernous space, past the towering, shrouded sculptures and the carefully spotlighted canvases. The security lights, usually bathing the room in a sterile glow, were dimmed, casting long, shifting shadows that played tricks on her eyes. The scent of ozone from the distant thunderstorm now mingled with something else, a faint, expensive aroma of leather and a hint of a powerful, unfamiliar cologne. It was the scent of presence, of a singular, imposing masculinity. Her eyes finally landed on it, a sliver of darkness deeper than the shadows themselves, by the entrance to Mr. Thorne's private collection vault, a vault that should have been impregnable. A figure tall and undeniably masculine detached itself from the gloom. He wasn't moving stealthily, but with a deliberate, almost languid grace that spoke of absolute confidence. His silhouette was sharp against the distant glow of the city lights filtering through the high arched windows, and as he stepped further into the studio, the subtle gleam of a tailored suit fabric caught the faint light. Clara's breath hitched. He was no ordinary intruder. His presence was not one of furtive desperation, but of quiet authority, almost ownership. Panic, cold and sharp, constricted her throat. A robber. But why here? Why so calm? Every self-preservation instinct screamed to her to run, to hide, but her feet felt rooted to the polished concrete floor. Then fate, in its cruel, unpredictable way, decided to play its hand. As she backed away, her elbow brushed against the edge of her workstation. A display pedestal, holding a magnificent Ming Dynasty vase, a recent acquisition that Mr. Thorne had boasted about endlessly, wobbled precariously. Time seemed to slow. Clara lunged forward, a desperate, silent cry tearing through her. Her fingertips grazed the cold porcelain, but it was too late. The vase teetered, then crashed to the floor with a sickening, porcelain-shattering crack. The sound ripped through the silence, loud and absolute, echoing off the high ceilings like a gunshot. Clara froze, her eyes wide with horror, staring at the ruined masterpiece. A hairline crack, spiderwebbing across the delicate blue and white glaze, rendered it utterly, irredeemably broken. Her heart plummeted to her stomach. This wasn't just a crack. It was her life shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Mr. Thorne would destroy her. And Mia's scholarship, her future, everything. Careful, Mississippi. The deep, gravelly voice cut through her spiraling panic, unnervingly close. It wasn't loud, but it resonated with a quiet power that commanded attention. Some things are beyond repair. Clara spun around, her eyes meeting his for the first time. The man was a force of nature in human form. He stood perhaps 10 feet away, his dark eyes piercing, assessing, missing nothing. He was impossibly tall, broad-shouldered beneath the impeccably tailored charcoal suit that somehow looked more menacing than elegant. His dark hair, slicked back, caught the studio lights, emphasizing the sharp angles of his jawline and the cruel curve of his lips. There was an aura around him, thick and palpable, of danger, power, and an ancient, simmering intensity. He wasn't just a man. He was a presence, a predator in a finely woven disguise. Dante Volkov. The name, whispered with a mix of awe and fear in the city's elite circles, flashed through her mind. The notorious billionaire collector, whose fortune was as vast as it was mysterious, rumored to have fingers in every illicit pie from illicit art deals to other, darker enterprises. A shudder ran through her, both from fear and an inexplicable primal thrill. He didn't look at the shattered vase. His gaze, dark and unyielding, was fixed solely on her. It wasn't accusatory, but rather unnervingly penetrating, as if he could see straight into her soul, past the fear and the desperation. He took a slow, deliberate step closer, his eyes then dropping to her workstation, to the humble family heirloom Clara had been restoring. His gaze lingered on the delicate brushstrokes, on the intensity of her unfinished work. A slow, predatory smile, devoid of warmth but brimming with a dangerous amusement, spread across his lips. "That's rather unique," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the silent studio. "I'll buy it." "Name your price." Clara's mind reeled. Buy her painting? The one she poured her last hope into? He couldn't be serious. "I don't understand," she stammered, her voice a thin, reedy whisper. "It's not for sale, not here." He cut her off with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Everything has a price, miss." He paused, clearly expecting her name. "Evans. Clara Evans. Miss Evans." His voice lingered on her name, a possessive caress. "My offer stands. Name your price." Before she could formulate a coherent thought, before she could even grasp the audacity of his statement, he continued, his voice softer, yet sharper than any blade. "Enough for your sister, Mia, to complete her treatment. Enough for her scholarship to art school. And enough for you to breathe for a year without looking over your shoulder." Clara froze. He knew. He knew about Mia. About her illness. About the scholarship. How? The blood drained from her face, leaving her feeling dizzy and exposed. Her private torment laid bare before this dangerous stranger. Dante saw her shock, and his smile widened a grim, knowing curve. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket with a movement so fluid it was almost imperceptible. He pulled out a thick wad of cash, bound with a simple band, not neatly stacked like a banker's, but thick, raw, undeniable. He placed it carefully on her workstation, right beside her delicate brushes and solvents. The sheer volume of it was staggering, a small fortune in crisp, unblemished notes. It was more than she could ever dream of earning in a year, perhaps even 2. "Consider it done," he stated, his voice a quiet, unsettling declaration of ownership. Not just of the painting, but of her attention, her predicament, her very soul. The cash sat there, a tangible display of his immense wealth and formidable power, a lifeline thrown into her abyss. It was a golden cage, an irresistible trap. Clara stared at the money, then up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock, sudden, desperate hope, and an undeniable, bone-deep fear. He hadn't asked for a price. He had named it, and it was precisely what she needed, what she had prayed for in her darkest moments. The broken Ming vase lay forgotten. The air crackled between them, thick with an unspoken understanding. She was terrified, yes, but a tiny, treacherous part of her, the part that had been suffocating under the weight of endless worry, felt a thrilling, dangerous surge of relief. He was dangerous, terrifying, a wolf in bespoke clothing. But he was also offering salvation. Dante took another step closer, his dark eyes locking onto hers, intense and unyielding. "Don't look so shocked, Piccola," he murmured, the Italian endearment a possessive whisper that sent a shiver down her spine. "I know things. It's my business." He paused, his gaze dropping to the shattered vase, then back to her. "And now, it seems you are my business." He paused again, a beat of profound silence, then a chilling question, a perfect cliffhanger that sealed her fate. "So, Miss Evans, do we have a deal?" The cold light of dawn filtering through the high studio windows did little to dispel the oppressive weight in Clara's chest. Dante Volkov was gone, vanished as silently as he had appeared, leaving behind only the shattered Ming vase and the thick, undeniable stack of cash on her workbench. The money, a brutal balm to her soul, pulsed with a dangerous energy, a silent testament to the impossible deal she had made. "Do we have a deal?" His words still echoed, a possessive hum in her ears. She hadn't said yes, not explicitly, but her terrified silence and the frantic thrum of hope in her veins had been answer enough. Clara spent the rest of the night in a daze, meticulously, almost mechanically, cleaning up the Ming vase shards, each piece a shard of her former safe life. She had carefully wrapped her restored heirloom, its newly vibrant colors now feeling like a stolen treasure, and tucked the staggering sum of cash deep within her oldest, most battered handbag. The money felt both like a miracle and a curse. It was Mia's salvation, yet it came with the chilling price of Dante Volkov's unsettling attention. The next morning, the calm before the storm was brutally short-lived. Mr. Thorne's assistant, a perpetually flustered young woman named Brenda, found the shattered vase. Her shriek ripped through the usually hushed hallways, drawing Thorne himself from his opulent office, his face a mask of furious disbelief. Clara watched from the doorway of her studio, her stomach churning with a cold dread. Thorne's eyes, usually calculating, were now blazing with a terrifying, unbridled rage. "What in God's name happened here?" he bellowed, his voice echoing through the gallery. This was a priceless acquisition. Who was working here last night? Clara knew she had to step forward. Lying would only prolong the inevitable. "It was me, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice unnaturally steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "An accident." I was startled. Thorne spun on her, his face contorted. "Startled? You clumsy idiot. Do you have any idea what you've done? That vase alone was insured for millions. This will ruin us. It will ruin you." He paced frantically, then his gaze, sharp as a hawk's, landed on her workstation. He noticed the absence of her usual after-hours project, the Rubens attribution, and the subtle, lingering scent of the solvents she used only for her heirloom. His eyes narrowed. "And what exactly were you doing here so late, Miss Evans? What personal projects are you pursuing on my time, with my materials?" Clara's blood ran cold. He suspected. He knew. I was trying to finish the Rubens, sir," she stammered, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. Thorne chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Don't insult my intelligence, Clara. I know your routine, and I know the quality of your personal brushes." His gaze flickered to the bulging, ancient handbag clutched tightly in her hand. "And I certainly know the signs of sudden, unexplained affluence." His voice dropped, becoming a dangerous hiss. "Did you perhaps sell something valuable, Miss Evans? Something that you were working on here? Perhaps to a certain, notorious buyer." Her silence was her confession. Thorne leaned in, his voice barely a whisper, yet it felt like a thunderclap. "Mia's scholarship, isn't it? Her little art school dream. Imagine the scandal, Clara. An art restorer, moonlighting on stolen time, damaging priceless artifacts, and then engaging in unsanctioned sales with questionable clients. I wonder how quickly St. Jude's would revoke her grant. How quickly her application would be tossed aside." The threat was explicit, brutal. It ripped through her, leaving her breathless. He wasn't just threatening her job. He was threatening Mia's entire future, her fragile hope. "Please, Mr. Thorne," she pleaded, desperation raw in her voice. "Anything but that. I'll pay for the vase, I'll work extra hours, whatever you want." He held up a hand, silencing her. His expression shifted, becoming less enraged, more coldly calculating. "Oh, I have something much more productive in mind, Clara. Something that will make us both very, very wealthy." He gestured for her to follow him into his office, the air thick with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and burgeoning malice. Inside, he pulled out a heavily gilded frame, revealing a painting beneath a velvet cloth. It depicted a Madonna and Child, clearly a Renaissance piece, but something felt off. Clara, with her trained eye, immediately noticed the anachronisms, the brushstrokes that weren't quite right, the pigment composition that hinted at a modern hand. It was an exquisite forgery, a masterful deception. This, Clara, Thorne purred, his eyes gleaming with avarice, is destined for my private Black Orchid auction next month. A very exclusive event. A select clientele. I need your expert authentication, signed and sealed, proclaiming it a long-lost masterpiece. Clara stared at the painting, then at Thorne, horror washing over her. It's a fake, sir. A very good one, but still a fake. Thorne's smile vanished. It's whatever I say it is, Miss Evans. And whatever you say it is. Your signature, your reputation, will elevate it to true value for my associates. Fail to provide it, and Mia's scholarship will be the least of your worries. I can make sure you never work in this city, in this country, ever again. And I can make sure certain connections of mine learn about your little sister's delicate health. Accidents, Clara, can happen to anyone. The unspoken menace hung heavy, suffocating. Clara felt a cold, paralyzing fear grip her. She was trapped between Thorne's ruthless blackmail and the unspoken, dangerous expectations of Dante Volkov. In the days that followed, Clara moved like a ghost through the gallery, her mind a frantic scramble for solutions. She tried discreetly searching for other job openings, but the art world was a tightly knit, insular community, and Thorne's influence was vast. Every door she knocked on remained firmly shut. She even considered going to the authorities, but the thought of exposing Thorne and potentially implicating herself and Mia in a scandal that could shatter their lives held her back. She was alone, utterly alone, navigating a treacherous labyrinth with Mia's future as the prize. Then Dante Volkov began to appear. Not overtly, not threateningly, but with an unsettling regularity that frayed her nerves even further. She'd see his sleek black car parked a block from the gallery, a shadow in the periphery. He'd be at a high-profile art preview that Thorne dragged her to, his dark eyes meeting hers across the crowded room, a silent, knowing challenge in their depths. Once she even saw him at St. Jude's, ostensibly meeting with a foundation for his own philanthropic endeavors, but his gaze, when it met hers, was direct, possessive, and lingering, a stark reminder that he was watching, always watching. He never spoke to her directly, not in public. But the messages were clear. A minor deal Thorne had been boasting about suddenly fell through, mysteriously sabotaged. A rival gallery, eager to bid against Thorne, received an anonymous, devastating tip about his questionable practices. Whispers, subtle but persistent, began to circulate among the city's art elite, painting Thorne in a less favorable light. Dante was making his presence known, subtly undermining Thorne, a quiet display of power that left Clara unnerved and strangely, undeniably impressed. She felt like a pawn in a game far beyond her understanding, caught between Thorne's suffocating web of deceit and Dante Volkov's unsettling, predatory attention. One was trying to destroy her, the other was claiming her. The fear was constant, a knot in her stomach, but beneath it, a new, dangerous current began to flow, a strange fascination with the man who watched her from the shadows, the man who seemed to wield an invisible scepter over their dangerous world. One evening, as she finished another long day, a small, unmarked envelope appeared on her desk. Inside was a single, pristine white rose and a business card. No name, just a single, elegantly embossed phone number. Clara stared at it, her heart thumping. A silent invitation, or a subtle trap. She felt the magnetic pull, the intoxicating danger, drawing her closer to the enigmatic man who held her fate in his formidable hands. The week following the shattered Ming vase and Dante Volkov's chilling proposition felt less like time passing and more like wading through treacle. The cash, now hidden in a dusty shoebox beneath her bed, was a constant, burning presence, a reminder of the bargain she'd struck with a devil in a bespoke suit. Mr. Thorne, surprisingly, had been unusually subdued, his usual bluster replaced by a wary silence. He'd merely grunted when Clara had, with trembling hands, handed him her signed authentication for the fake Renaissance piece. His eyes, however, had held a flicker of something new, suspicion, mixed with an almost desperate relief. He seemed to sense the shift in the air, a predatory presence circling his own, increasingly fragile territory. Clara's world, once a meticulous arrangement of predictable anxieties, now felt unmoored. The phone card Dante had left, stark white with only a gilded number, lay hidden in her purse, a silent, vibrating promise. She hadn't called. Couldn't. But its presence was a constant hum beneath her skin, a tether to the dangerous man who had named her sister's illness and her deepest fears with unnerving ease. Then the official announcement arrived. Thorne and Company had been acquired. Not by a major conglomerate, but by a newly formed entity, Volkov Arts and Acquisitions. The news sent a ripple of bewildered panic through the gallery staff. Mr. Thorne, it was curtly stated, had retired unexpectedly. Dante Volkov was the new owner. Just like that, Clara was pulled irrevocably into his orbit. Her first meeting with Dante as her new boss was in what used to be Thorne's opulent office, now stripped bare of Thorne's gaudy taste and imbued with Dante's austere, powerful aesthetic. Dark wood, minimalist lines, and a single breathtaking abstract sculpture dominating the room. He sat behind the enormous desk, a silent, imposing figure, his dark suit perfectly tailored, his eyes, as always, missing nothing. The air was thick with the scent of his expensive cologne, rich, woody, and utterly masculine. It was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. "Miss Evans," he began, his voice smooth, carrying the faint, alluring New York edge she remembered. "Welcome to Volkov Arts. I understand you specialize in restoration." Clara swallowed, her palms clammy. "Yes, Mr. Volkov. For nearly 6 years." "Indeed." His eyes flickered, taking her in. "Your work on the Rubens attribution was adequate. But I've seen your true talent." He paused, letting the implication hang. "The heirloom. You have remarkable hands, Clara." The compliment, delivered with such a possessive tone, sent a jolt through her. It wasn't praise, it was acclaim. He knew everything. Over the next few weeks, Clara found herself working more closely with Dante than she could have ever imagined. He commissioned her to restore pieces for his private collection, not forgeries, but genuine, exquisite works that had suffered neglect. He spent hours in the studio with her, observing, asking incisive questions that revealed a profound understanding of art history and restoration techniques, a surprising depth beneath his ruthless exterior. She watched him, fascinated and wary. He was ruthlessly efficient, restructuring Thorne and Company with surgical precision. Old, inefficient staff were quietly let go. New, sharper individuals were brought in. He moved through the gallery like a dark, elegant panther, his presence commanding absolute deference. She heard whispers of his business dealings, how quickly competitors folded, how smoothly obstacles disappeared. It was terrifying to witness, a stark reminder of the world he inhabited, the power he wielded. Yet there were glimpses, fleeting moments that chipped away at her fear and sparked a dangerous curiosity. One evening, deep into the restoration of a fragmented Byzantine icon, Clara looked up to find Dante standing in the studio doorway, a steaming cup of Earl Grey tea in his hand, exactly how she liked it. "You look exhausted, Clara," he'd said, his voice surprisingly soft. "Take a break." He placed the cup on her workstation, his large hand brushing hers for a fleeting second. The contact sent a jolt of heat through her, a startling intimacy. He hadn't asked if she wanted tea. He'd simply provided it, an act of silent, undeniable care. Another time, she overheard him on the phone, speaking in rapid, guttural Italian, his voice sharp and authoritative. But then a softer tone. "Mia's next appointment. Ensure everything is in order. The best specialists. No expense spared." He hadn't known she was listening. The conversation, clearly about her sister, sent a confusing wave of relief and fear through her. He wasn't just observing, he was actively managing, protecting. His care, however, felt less like benevolence and more like a carefully guarded, fiercely possessive act. She was his responsibility now. Mia was his concern. Clara began to notice the small things about him, details that hinted at the man beneath the impenetrable mask. The way his eyes, so often cold and calculating, would soften almost imperceptibly when he spoke of a particular Renaissance master. The faint, jagged scar that ran just below his left ear, partially hidden by his dark hair, a silent testament to a past she could only imagine. Sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, a fleeting look of profound loneliness would cross his face, a raw, vulnerable glimpse into a soul burdened by its own power. It was a crack in his formidable armor, and it drew her in against all her rational instincts. Their shared passion for art became their unexpected bridge. He would discuss art with her for hours, his voice losing its steely edge, becoming almost passionate as he spoke of brushstrokes, symbolism, and the history behind a piece. Clara found herself responding in kind, her own knowledge and keen eye igniting his interest. It was during these moments, when the art itself seemed to strip away their defenses, that Clara felt truly seen, truly valued for her intellect and talent, not just her desperation. He listened. He understood. And the realization was both intoxicating and terrifying. The chemistry between them was a palpable force, a silent current that hummed beneath every professional interaction. His presence filled a room, and when he was near, Clara felt an electric awareness of her own body, a primal hum of attraction she hadn't felt since before Mia was born. When he leaned in to examine a brushstroke, his arm brushing hers, a spark ignited. When their eyes met across the studio, a silent conversation passed between them, a dangerous tango of curiosity, fear, and undeniable desire. She found herself dwelling on his touch, the scent of his cologne, the predatory curve of his smile. It was madness, she knew. He was a dangerous man, likely involved in unspeakable things, and she was putting herself, and by extension Mia, at risk. But the emptiness that had settled in her heart after years of quiet struggle yearned for the intense, dangerous life he offered, the thrilling sense of being truly alive. One rainy afternoon, as they stood examining a newly acquired Baroque sculpture, Dante's hand reached out, not to touch the art, but to gently brush a stray strand of hair from Clara's cheek. His fingers lingered for a fraction too long, sending a shiver down her spine. His eyes, dark and fathomless, locked onto hers. "You are quite remarkable, Clara Evans," he murmured, his voice husky, filled with an unspoken intensity. "Don't ever forget that." The moment hung, charged and heavy, with unspoken promises and perilous desires. Clara felt a strange mix of fear and an almost unbearable longing. She wanted to lean into his touch, to surrender to the dangerous pull he exerted over her. But then the image of Mia, her innocent, trusting face, flashed in her mind. She pulled back, barely perceptibly, her breath catching. Dante's eyes darkened, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. He dropped his hand, the moment shattered, but the tension remained, thicker, more potent than before. He had offered her safety, security, and now he was offering something far more dangerous. Her heart raced, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She was falling inexorably into his world, into his possessive grasp. As the sun began to set, casting long crimson shadows across the polished gallery floor, the doorbell chimed. An unexpected delivery. Dante's jaw tightened. "I wasn't expecting anyone," he muttered, a hint of unease in his voice. He moved towards the entrance, his hands subtly sliding inside his jacket, a gesture Clara now recognized. A moment later, his expression hardened, a cold, ruthless mask settling over his features. He held up a single black rose, its petals edged with a chilling, artificial crimson, not blood, but a simulation of it. Attached to it was a small, ornate card. Dante read it, his eyes narrowing to dangerous slits. "It seems," he said, his voice flat, his gaze turning to Clara, "an old acquaintance of Mr. Thorne has decided to pay us a visit. And his message is specifically for you, Clara." The black rose in Dante's hand seemed to pulse with an ominous energy, its artificial crimson petals a stark contrast to the elegant antiquity of the gallery. Clara felt a cold dread crawl up her spine. A message specifically for her? Her mind raced, grasping at possibilities. Thorne? Had he somehow orchestrated this from afar? Dante's gaze, when it met hers, was like steel, cold, hard, and utterly ruthless. He turned the card over, his thumb tracing the embossed letters. "It's from a Mr. Julian Vance," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, yet resonating with an undercurrent of dangerous intent. "An old acquaintance of Thorne's, as it happens, and a rather persistent rival collector. It seems he takes issue with certain new arrangements at Volkov Arts." He handed the card to Clara. The message, etched in elegant, looping script, was chillingly simple. "Some art is best left in the shadows, Miss Evans. As are some artists. Your sister's delicate constitution might find a spotlight. Unforgiving." JV. Clara's blood ran cold. Mia? He knew about Mia. The threat was unmistakable, a poison dart aimed directly at her most vulnerable point. Her hands trembled so violently she almost dropped the card. Julian Vance. The name sparked a memory. Thorne had mentioned him once, dismissively, as a low-level opportunist who specialized in acquiring pieces through less than reputable means, always circling Thorne's more prominent dealings. Now he was circling her. "He's threatening Mia," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible, choked with fear. How could he possibly know? Dante's hand clamped down on her shoulder, a possessive, grounding weight. His touch, usually a source of confusing fascination, was now a lifeline. "He knows because Thorne is a cornered rat," Dante growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "And cornered rats will tell anyone anything to save their miserable hides. Vance clearly believes he can use you to destabilize me, to reclaim a piece of Thorne's territory." His eyes, usually guarded, now blazed with a fierce, protective fire that sent a thrill of terror and something else, a desperate gratitude, through Clara. "What do we do?" she asked, her breath shallow. The fear was paralyzing, a stark reminder of her helplessness against these shadowy forces. Dante's jaw tightened. "We ensure Mr. Vance understands his place, and that you are mine to protect." The next few days were a blur of heightened tension. Clara felt constantly on edge, jumping at every shadow, every unexpected sound. She doubled her precautions around Mia, walking her to and from school, staying glued to her side, the threat of Julian Vance a suffocating presence. Mia, sensitive as always, noticed her mother's anxiety. "Mommy, are you okay? You seem worried." Clara forced a smile, lying through her teeth. "Just a busy week, baby." The lie tasted bitter. Dante, however, remained a picture of controlled, deadly calm. He moved with an even greater purpose, his conversations clipped, his phone calls frequent and conducted in hushed, rapid Italian. He brought in additional discreet security personnel, men with quiet eyes and unnervingly still hands, who blended seamlessly into the gallery's elegant facade. Their presence was a silent, constant reminder of the unseen dangers that lurked beneath the polished surface of Volkov Arts. Clara witnessed his efficiency, his ruthless precision, firsthand. She saw him on a video call, his face a mask of cold fury, speaking to a man she didn't recognize. The Italian words were beyond her comprehension, but the tone, the sheer force of his controlled rage, was universally understood. Later that day, news began to ripple through the city's financial circles. Julian Vance's private art collection, his primary asset, was suddenly seized due to unforeseen legal entanglements. His major investors mysteriously pulled out. His credit lines evaporated overnight. His carefully constructed empire, built on speculation and underhanded dealings, began to crumble with astonishing speed. It was swift, silent, and utterly devastating. A public smear campaign against Vance's shady practices, leaked to prominent art journals, further solidified his demise. He was being systematically dismantled, his reputation shredded, his livelihood obliterated. Clara watched, a horrified fascination gripping her. Dante hadn't physically touched him, hadn't raised a hand, yet the destruction was absolute. This was the power of a mafia boss. Not brute force, but calculated, widespread ruin. One afternoon, Dante found Clara in the studio, staring blankly at a half-finished canvas. The news of Vance's downfall had just broken. She felt a profound sense of relief, but also a chilling understanding of the man who had brought it about. "He won't bother you again," Dante stated, his voice quiet, almost casual, yet vibrating with an undercurrent of steel. Clara turned to him, her eyes wide. You did all this. For me. For Mia." He merely nodded, his gaze intense, possessive. "What's mine, Clara, is protected. With everything I have." He moved closer, his presence utterly dominating the space, making the air crackle with latent energy. He overstepped. He threatened my future, my interests. His eyes dropped to her lips, a possessive hunger swirling in their depths. "No one threatens what's mine." The word sent a shiver through her, a complex mix of terror, gratitude, and a dangerous thrill. She was an interest, a possession in his eyes. But she was also safe. Utterly, irrevocably safe from Vance, from Thorne, from the cold, indifferent world that had once threatened to swallow her whole. Her dependence on him, a fragile seed planted weeks ago, now began to take root, twisting around her heart. He was a monster, yes, but her monster. Dante reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek. His touch was both tender and firm, a silent declaration. "Are you still afraid, Piccola?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble. Clara met his gaze, her own eyes wide and vulnerable. Yes, she admitted, the word a soft confession. But a nod of you. Not entirely. A dark, knowing smile touched his lips, a fleeting glimpse of triumph. He leaned closer, his scent enveloping her, expensive, dangerous, and utterly intoxicating. His breath ghosted over her lips, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Good, he whispered, his eyes burning into hers. Because that fear, it will keep you alive. And close to me, he kissed her then. Not gently, not tentatively, but with a fierce, possessive hunger that stole her breath and ignited a fire deep within her. It was a kiss that tasted of danger, of power, of absolute claim. Clara's mind screamed warnings, but her body betrayed her, responding with an answering urgency, her hands instinctively fisting in his expensive suit jacket. When he finally pulled away, both of them breathing heavily, his eyes were dark with unfulfilled desire. "This is just the beginning, Clara," he whispered, his voice rough. "You're bound to me now, and I will burn the world down to keep you safe." His gaze dropped to her lips again, a silent promise. "But first," he added, a chilling glint in his eyes, "we have more to discuss. About loyalty, and about the secrets we both keep." The kiss had been a thunderclap, a seismic shift in Clara's carefully constructed world. It wasn't just physical. It was a claiming, a brand seared onto her soul. Dante's possessive words, his terrifying display of power, and the intoxicating fear he evoked had bound her in a way she never thought possible. Julian Vance was gone, utterly annihilated, and with his downfall, a fragile sense of security settled over Clara. She was still in a dangerous world, yes, but now she was protected. And that protection came with the intense, unsettling, yet undeniably alluring presence of Dante Volkov. In the days that followed, the unspoken tension between them was a living, breathing entity in the gallery. Their interactions, once strictly professional with undertones of dark fascination, now pulsed with a raw, undeniable intimacy. Their eyes met across crowded rooms, holding for a beat too long. A brush of hands over a shared restoration project sent sparks flying. Clara, no longer driven by pure desperation, found herself increasingly bold, her curiosity about Dante eclipsing her initial fear. She wanted to understand the man behind the mask, the vulnerability she'd glimpsed in his eyes. One evening, after Mia was safely asleep and tucked in at home, with Dante's discreetly arranged, round-the-clock security detail watching over her apartment building, Clara found herself back at Volkov Arts. Dante had summoned her, ostensibly to review a new acquisition for restoration. But the late hour, the dimmed lights, and the bottle of aged Chianti breathing on his desk hinted at a different agenda. He poured her a glass, his movements precise, almost gentle. "The piece is magnificent," he said, gesturing to a newly arrived Baroque sculpture, a graceful depiction of a fallen angel. "But I wanted to discuss something else." He met her gaze across the polished mahogany. "You have questions, Clara. I see them in your eyes, and I believe you've earned some answers." Clara's heart thrummed. This was it, the moment she'd been both dreading and craving. She took a sip of the rich, dark wine, its warmth spreading through her veins, steeling her resolve. "Your family, Dante," she began, her voice softer than she intended. "There are whispers about your past, about the Morana family." She used the name she discreetly dug up from vague rumors, hoping it wasn't a step too far. Dante's jaw tightened, a fleeting shadow passing over his face. He leaned back, his gaze distant, lost in some private memory. "The Morana name," he repeated, the words tasting like ash. "It carries weight. And blood. My grandfather came from Sicily with nothing but a fierce will and a dangerous ambition. He built an empire, piece by brutal piece. Not in art, but in logistics. In enforcement." His voice was devoid of emotion, a practiced attachment. "My father inherited it. A king in his own right, but one who eventually succumbed to the violence he courted." Clara watched him, captivated. She saw the lines of tension around his eyes, the almost imperceptible clenching of his hands. "He was murdered, wasn't he?" she whispered. The unspoken knowledge hung heavy in the air. Dante nodded, a grim acknowledgement. "In front of me. I was 18. A rival family. A power struggle." His voice was rough now, stripped of its practiced control. "I saw him fall. Saw the blood. The betrayal." He paused, taking a long, slow drink of his wine. "I had a choice. Walk away, let it all crumble. Or step into his shoes. Claim what was mine. Protect what he built. And you chose to step in, Clara finished, understanding dawning. This wasn't just about power. It was about legacy, survival, and a twisted form of loyalty. I chose to survive, Dante corrected, his eyes burning with a fierce, ancient pain she recognized from her own past. And I chose to set rules. No drugs. No women. No children. Nothing that directly harms innocence. The art world, it offered a cleaner facade, a way to legitimize. But the old connections, they demand loyalty. They still do. Clara felt a profound ache in her chest. She saw not just the ruthless mafia boss, but the boy who had witnessed his father's brutal death, forced to carry a legacy of violence he perhaps never fully wanted. It's a heavy burden, she murmured, her voice filled with a genuine empathy that seemed to surprise him. He met her gaze, his expression softening, a vulnerability she hadn't thought possible. And you, Clara, he countered, his voice gentle. You carry your own. Mia, your husband. The mention of David, her late husband, was a raw wound, still tender after all these years. Clara looked away, her eyes blurring. He was everything. My anchor. She struggled to find words, the grief still a physical ache. Pancreatic cancer. It was fast, brutal. He wasted away before my eyes. Her voice cracked. And when he left, I felt like I lost myself. I was just a mother, a survivor, just functional. A tear traced a path down her cheek. I felt invisible, worthless without him. Dante reached across the table, his strong, warm hand covering hers, a silent, powerful anchor. His touch was firm, yet incredibly tender, sending a wave of comfort through her. You are not invisible, Clara, he said, his voice a low, soothing balm. And you are far from worthless. His thumb stroked the back of her hand, a mesmerizing, comforting gesture. I saw you that night in the studio, alone, desperate. But your hands, your eyes, they spoke of a passion, a talent, a strength that was extraordinary. You were fighting for your sister, for your art, for yourself. You were not just functional, Clara. You were magnificent. His words, so genuine, so intensely delivered, resonated deep within her, touching a place she thought had long since withered. He saw her, the real her, beyond the struggling single mother, beyond the desperate employee. He saw the artist, the fighter, the woman she used to be, and the woman she was becoming. The sense of belonging, of being truly understood, was overwhelming. She had spent years feeling like a ghost, and he had made her feel undeniably, powerfully alive. Clara leaned into his touch, her eyes meeting his. The air crackled with unspoken emotions, a shared vulnerability that bound them closer than any contract. I haven't felt this scene, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, since David. Dante's gaze deepened, his dark eyes burning with an intense understanding. He slowly stood, pulling her gently to her feet. The space between them evaporated. He framed her face with his hands, his thumbs tracing the curve of her cheekbones, his touch reverent. You are more than a memory, Clara, he murmured, his voice a low, rough caress. You are fire. You are life. And you are mine. He kissed her then, not with the hungry aggression of before, but with a profound tenderness, a deep emotional connection that pierced her very soul. It was a kiss of shared wounds, of mutual understanding, a promise of a future where they could heal together. Clara's hands instinctively wrapped around his neck, pulling him closer, her body molding against his. She felt safe, cherished, and intensely, thrillingly alive. The fear was still there, a distant hum, but was eclipsed by the powerful surge of love and belonging. She was no longer adrift. She was tethered irrevocably to him. As the kiss deepened, a faint metallic scent wafted into the room from the open window, carried on the night air, the unmistakable tang of burnt rubber and distant sirens. Dante pulled away abruptly, his eyes snapping open, instantly alert, the mafia boss mask slamming back into place. His hand instinctively went to the small, discreet holster beneath his jacket. What is it? Clara whispered, her heart plummeting, the moment of intimacy shattered by the sudden shift in his demeanor. Dante's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. Something is happening, he stated, his voice now cold, flat. Something close. He moved swiftly to the window, peering down at the street below, his expression grim. And I have a very bad feeling, Clara, that it directly involves you. The faint scent of burnt rubber and distant sirens, carried in the cool night air, was a cruel, jarring rupture. It tore through the fragile intimacy that had bloomed between Clara and Dante, shattering the tender moment into a million cold fragments. Dante's hand, which had cradled her face with such unexpected tenderness, dropped away, and his eyes, moments ago pools of dark desire, snapped shut, then opened, sharp and predatory. The Mafia Boss mask, once a carefully constructed facade, now slammed back into place with brutal finality. "What is it?" Clara had whispered, her heart plummeting, the warmth of his kiss still tingling on her lips, now chilling with a terrifying premonition. Dante didn't answer her directly. He moved to the large, arched window, his hand instinctively sliding inside his jacket, a gesture so swift and ingrained it spoke volumes of a life lived on a knife's edge. His profile, silhouetted against the city lights, was a grim, unyielding line. "Something is happening," he stated, his voice now devoid of any warmth, flat and utterly ruthless. "Something close." His gaze, usually so controlled, swept the street below with frantic intensity. "And I have a very bad feeling, Clara, that it directly involves you." A sickening premonition coiled in Clara's gut. The air in the opulent office, once filled with the scent of Chianti and burgeoning desire, now tasted metallic like fear. The sirens grew louder, closer, wailing a discordant melody of impending doom. Then her phone, tucked away in her purse, vibrated. It wasn't the usual cheerful ringtone, but a harsh, insistent buzz. Her hands, already trembling, fumbled for it. The caller ID flashed. St. Jude's Children's Hospital. "Mia?" Her blood ran cold. "Hello." Clara's voice was a barely audible tremor. The voice on the other end was clipped, professional, yet chillingly devoid of empathy. "Ms. Evans, this is Dr. Albright from Mia's care team. I'm afraid I have some disturbing news. Effective immediately, we are suspending Mia's experimental treatment protocol. All appointments are canceled until further notice." Clara's world tilted. The opulent office, Dante's formidable presence, the very ground beneath her feet, all dissolved into a terrifying white-hot haze. "What? Why? You can't. Mia needs this treatment. She's..." "Due to recent complications involving your financial background and certain legal advisories we've received," Dr. Albright interrupted, her voice gaining an edge of accusation, "the hospital's ethics committee has deemed it prudent to distance ourselves until these matters are resolved. We cannot risk compromising our institution's integrity. We suggest you seek alternative care." The line clicked dead. Clara stared at her phone, the words alternative care echoing like a death knell. "Mia?" Her sister's pale, trusting face flashed before her eyes. The treatment was their only hope. Legal advisories? Financial background? It couldn't be a coincidence. Or someone worse. She felt a profound, visceral terror, a cold, crushing despair unlike anything she had ever known. She had traded one devil for another, and Mia was paying the price. Before she could process the devastating news, before she could even turn to Dante, the gallery's main door burst open with a crash. 3 men, dressed in nondescript dark suits, strode in, their faces grim, their authority radiating in the sudden, deafening silence. One of them held up a badge. "Clara Evans?" he barked, his eyes scanning the room, landing on her with chilling precision. "You're under arrest." Clara's breath hitched. Arrest? For what? Her mind was a frantic scramble of confusion and terror. On what charges? Dante's voice, cold and dangerous, cut through the shock. He had moved swiftly, now standing directly in front of Clara, a formidable protective shield. The lead agent, a man with piercing gray eyes, didn't flinch. Conspiracy to commit art fraud, illegal sale of stolen goods, and complicity in money laundering. "We have substantial evidence, Mr. Volkov, linking Ms. Evans directly to Arthur Thorne's illicit activities. Signed documents, authenticated by her own hand, implicating her in a scheme to launder funds through fraudulent art sales. Your newly acquired gallery, Mr. Volkov, seems to have inherited quite a mess." His gaze flickered to Dante, a challenge in his eyes. "You might want to distance yourself, sir." Quickly. "Signed documents?" Clara stared, utterly dumbfounded. The fake authentication for Thorne's Renaissance piece. The one he blackmailed her into. He had framed her. He had used her desperation, her love for Mia, to ensure his own escape, leaving her to take the fall. The bitter taste of betrayal coated her tongue. She looked at Dante, her only hope, her dark protector. His face was unreadable, a mask of cold fury and calculating assessment. His hand had dropped from her shoulder, his body, once a shield, now felt like an unbreachable wall. He didn't deny the charges, didn't defend her, didn't even utter a word in her favor. He simply watched, his silence a deafening roar of perceived abandonment. In her lowest moment, when everything she held dear was crumbling, when she was being falsely accused and Mia was in mortal danger, he was distant, cold, utterly, brutally silent. A profound, sickening wave of despair washed over Clara. He had used her, all along, just as Thorne had. His promises of protection, his tender words, his fierce passion, it had all been a lie, a manipulative game to secure his assets, to consolidate his power. She was a pawn, nothing more. A tool to be discarded when the game turned sour. The intimate moments, the shared vulnerabilities, the fleeting glimpses behind his mask, they now felt like cruel mockery. "Ms. Evans," the agent repeated, "come with us. Any resistance will only complicate matters." Clara felt a profound, heartbreaking separation from Dante, an emotional chasm opening between them. Her protector, her lifeline, had vanished. She was alone. Utterly, terrifyingly alone. The betrayal, the hopelessness, the sheer terror for Mia choked her. She was at the abyss, stripped of everything. Her career, her reputation, Mia's future, even the fragile hope of love she had dared to entertain with Dante, all were irrevocably lost. She offered no resistance. Her legs felt like lead, her mind numb with shock and a despair so deep it bordered on catatonia. As the agents clamped cold metal handcuffs around her wrists, their click echoing in the vast, silent gallery, she risked one last glance at Dante. His eyes, still unreadable, met hers. There was no warmth, no reassurance, no sign of the man who had promised to burn the world down for her. Only cold, hard assessment. "Mia," Clara choked out the single word, a desperate, broken plea. Dante's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek, but he remained silent, a statue of chilling indifference. The silence was her answer. He wasn't coming for her. He had abandoned her. She felt the crushing weight of profound isolation, her heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. As they led her out, the sirens wailing closer, her vision blurred with tears. She was trapped, framed, and utterly, heartbreakingly alone. And Dante Volkov, the man who had claimed her, who had shown her a fleeting glimpse of tenderness, simply watched her go, his expression as unyielding as the stone gargoyles on the gallery's facade. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate, plunging her into an even darker abyss. The heavy oak doors of Volkov Arts and Acquisitions slammed shut, echoing with a deafening finality. Clara was gone, swallowed by the grim agents and the wailing sirens. Dante Volkov stood motionless, a statue carved from granite, his face an impenetrable mask. The silence in the gallery was absolute, a void where moments ago, love had blossomed and hope had been brutally extinguished. But beneath that frozen exterior, an inferno raged. His heart, usually a cold, calculating machine, now hammered with a savage, unbridled fury. They had taken her. They had touched what was his. And they had dared to threaten Mia. The doctor's cold words, overheard fragments of a phone call, replayed in his mind, Mia's treatment suspended, legal advisories, integrity. It wasn't just Clara they had taken. They had struck at his most vulnerable point, at the innocent child he had tacitly sworn to protect. His initial silence wasn't shock. It was the calm before the storm, the methodical analysis of a predator preparing its hunt. His mind, sharper than any blade, raced through possibilities, connections, weaknesses. Thorne. It had to be Thorne, pulling strings from behind bars, a pathetic act of vengeful defiance. Or one of Thorne's desperate, greedy associates, seeking to capitalize on the chaos. Dante pulled out his phone, his movements swift and economical, his fingers flying across the screen. He barked orders into the receiver, a torrent of rapid, guttural Italian that crackled with barely contained violence. Find Arthur Thorne's lawyer. Find every contact, every ghost from his past. I want names, addresses, vulnerabilities, and find out where they've taken Clara. Now, his voice, usually smooth, was a low, dangerous growl. His network, vast and shadowy, hummed into immediate action. Within minutes, information began to flow in. Clara was being held at the federal building downtown. Mia's treatment had been suspended by a direct, anonymous tip to the hospital's ethics committee, alleging financial impropriety by Clara, complete with fabricated bank statements linking her to Thorne's money laundering. The architect of this intricate, brutal frame-up was Julian Vance, not utterly destroyed, but a wounded, venomous snake, desperate for revenge, pulling Thorne's strings from the shadows through a convoluted web of proxies. A cold, ruthless certainty settled over Dante. Vance. He should have known the snake would try to bite back. But to target Mia, that was unforgivable. That crossed the line. And when Dante Volkov's line was crossed, the consequences were absolute. Clara, meanwhile, was adrift in a sea of despair. The interrogation room was cold, sterile, and reeked faintly of stale coffee and desperation. Agent Hang and Agent Rodriguez had grilled her for hours, their voices relentless, their questions insidious. Each fabricated piece of evidence they presented, forged invoices, doctored emails, Thorne's signed confession, undoubtedly coerced or fabricated, twisted the knife of betrayal deeper. She was alone, utterly helpless, abandoned. Dante's face, impassive as she was led away, was a haunting tableau of her utter isolation. Mia's terrified face, the canceled treatment, the suffocating fear of future behind bars. It was too much. She felt herself spiraling, her spirit flickering like a dying candle flame. Suddenly, a commotion erupted outside the interrogation room. Shouts, a heavy thud of bodies. Then a roar, deep and utterly furious, that vibrated through the thin walls, a sound that made the hairs on Clara's arms stand on end. It was Dante. The door burst open, not by the agents, but by a powerful kick that splintered the frame. Dante Volkov stood there, a terrifying vision of unleashed fury. He was no longer the elegantly tailored businessman. He was a primal force, his dark suit slightly disheveled, his eyes blazing with a cold, terrifying light. Behind him, 2 federal agents lay sprawled on the floor, groaning. 2 of his own men, silent and efficient, stood guard, their expressions grim. You, Dante snarled, his gaze locking onto Agent Hang, his voice a low, dangerous growl that promised unimaginable pain. Where is she? Where is Clara Evans? Agent Hang, pale and clearly shaken, pointed to Clara, who sat stunned, her hands still cuffed. Dante ignored the agents, his eyes fixed only on Clara. He crossed the room in 3 long, predatory strides. He knelt before her, his large, powerful hands gently, almost reverently, taking her cuffed wrists. His face, usually so controlled, was raw with a fierce, possessive love she had never truly seen. Mia is safe, Piccola, he murmured, his voice rough with emotion, his thumb stroking her cold skin. Her treatment has been reinstated. Everything is being taken care of. A wave of profound relief, so overwhelming it almost buckled her knees, washed over Clara. Mia was safe. Her breath hitched, tears streaming down her face, tears of terror and desperate, overwhelming gratitude. Dante then rose, his eyes hardening to chips of ice as he turned to the agents. You dared to touch her, he stated, his voice dangerously quiet. You dared to threaten her child. You will regret this. He pulled out a thick file, slamming it onto the table. Julian Vance. His network of forgeries, his money laundering operations, his connections to Thorne's past. All documented. All admissible. And all tied directly to the anonymous tip that suspended Mia's medical care and framed Ms. Evans. The agents stare at the file, their faces paling. It was a mountain of irrefutable evidence, meticulously compiled, damning beyond question. Dante had not just found the truth. He had meticulously gathered every shred of proof to utterly destroy the real culprits. This is all you have on Clara Evans, Dante continued, his voice dripping with venom, gesturing to the paltry, fabricated evidence against her. This is nothing. He then turned his full, terrifying wrath back to the lead agent. You will release her. No. And you will ensure that Julian Vance pays for every single minute of her pain. Or I will ensure that your career, your reputation, and everything you hold dear vanishes. Do you understand me? The agent, meeting Dante's blazing, unyielding gaze, swallowed hard. The raw, terrifying force emanating from Dante Volkov was undeniable, power far beyond any law or badge. It was the absolute, unbridled wrath of a man who had been pushed too far, who had come to reclaim what was his. Clara watched, mesmerized and terrified. This was the true Dante. The inferno beneath the ice. The brutal efficiency, the terrifying power, the complete and utter devotion. He was a monster, yes, but he was her monster, and he was fighting for her with a ferocity that stole her breath. As his men moved to uncuff her, the metal snapping open, Clara felt a surge of adrenaline, a desperate hope. She was safe. She was free. Because he had unleashed his wrath. But the fight wasn't over. Not for Dante. As the agents, now humbled and terrified, began to process her release, Dante's eyes, dark and dangerous, scanned the room. And as for Mr. Thorne, he murmured, a chilling promise in his voice, he will learn that even behind bars, some debts must be paid. In full. His gaze once more sought Clara's, a silent, possessive declaration. You are safe now, Piccola. But our fight has only just begun. The journey from the federal building back to Volkov, Arts felt like traversing a chasm between two realities. One moment, Clara was lost in the cold, sterile despair of an interrogation room, her future a blank canvas of fear and injustice. The next, she was enveloped in Dante's fierce embrace, the scent of his expensive cologne and his raw, masculine power a stark contrast to the lingering metallic tang of handcuffs on her wrists. The world outside the car window, blurring past in a dizzying rush, seemed trivial compared to the seismic shift within her. Dante hadn't said much in the car, his silence more potent than any words. He merely held her, one arm a steel band around her shoulders, the other hand gently stroking her hair, as if to reassure himself she was truly there, truly safe. Clara, still reeling from the trauma, clung to him, seeking solace in his formidable presence. The overwhelming relief about Mia, combined with the lingering terror of her arrest and the raw, undeniable proof of Dante's dark power, left her emotionally drained, a hollow ache in her chest. Back at Volkov Arts, the transformed office no longer felt imposing, but like a sanctuary. Dante led her directly to a plush sofa, pressing a glass of amber liquid into her trembling hands. It was a fine brandy, warm and smooth, burning a path down her throat, settling the frantic flutter in her stomach. He sat beside her, maintaining a close, watchful proximity, but giving her space to breathe, to process. Mia is with one of my trusted associates, he stated, his voice a low, reassuring rumble. Safe? Unaware of tonight's events. Her doctor confirmed her treatment has been fully reinstated with a new, much more aggressive protocol. Paid in full. Indefinitely. Clara's eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, met his. The gratitude that swelled within her was so profound it stole her breath. He hadn't just saved her, he'd ensured Mia's life, her future. Thank you, she whispered, the words barely audible. Dante, I don't know how I can ever. He cut her off gently, his fingers lifting her chin, forcing her to meet his intense gaze. You don't thank me, Piccola. You simply exist, and you are mine to protect. Always. The possessiveness in his tone, once a source of apprehension, now felt like a comforting balm, a solid, unyielding promise in a world that had betrayed her so brutally. Over the next few days, Clara slowly began to heal. Physically, she was fine, but the emotional scars ran deep. Dante was a constant, unwavering presence. He never left her side, working from the gallery, ensuring she ate, slept, and simply was. He would sit with her in the studio, watching her work on her heirloom, his silent company a balm to her frayed nerves. She saw how meticulously he tied up all loose ends from Thorne's treacherous past. Her name was formally cleared, all charges dropped, her reputation not just restored, but elevated, with Volkov Arts issuing a press release condemning Thorne's criminal deception and lauding Clara's unwavering integrity and unparalleled talent. But beneath the gentle care, Clara saw the dark, relentless machine of Dante's justice at work. He didn't speak of Julian Vance or Arthur Thorne directly, but the whispers that reached her were chilling. Vance's remaining assets were systematically seized, his entire lineage of illicit dealings exposed, his name utterly, irrevocably ruined. He vanished from the public eye, a ghost of his former avaricious self, stripped of every shred of influence and wealth. For Thorne, the consequences were more insidious. Beyond his prison sentence for fraud and money laundering, his family's legitimate businesses suddenly faced unforeseen audits, his offshore accounts mysteriously frozen, his reputation among his former peers utterly destroyed. Dante didn't resort to overt violence, but the retribution was brutal, precise, and absolute. He dismantled them piece by piece, leaving nothing but ruin in his wake. It was a chilling testament to his power, a display of poetic justice. That made Clara's blood run cold even as she felt a perverse satisfaction. One evening, as Clara watched him, grim-faced, taking a call in Italian that bristled with veiled threats, she finally grappled with the man he truly was. "Dante," she said, her voice quiet. You really are a monster, aren't you?" He turned to her, his dark eyes meeting hers, unblinking. "Yes, Clara. I am. I do what is necessary to protect what's mine. And I do it without remorse." He paused, his gaze softening, a flash of vulnerability she now recognized. "Does that frighten you?" Clara felt a tremor of fear, but it was interwoven with something else, a deep, unsettling acceptance. "Yes," she admitted. "It does. But it also makes me feel safe. Safer than I've ever been." She took a step towards him. "And I understand why you do it." She had seen his wounds, the boy forced to become a man of violence to protect his legacy. She had felt her own desperation for Mia. In his darkness, she found a strange, undeniable kinship. He closed the distance between them, his hands cupping her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. His eyes, dark and fathomless, held hers. "You understand that there is no going back from this, Clara. From us. My world, it is not gentle. It is not clean. It is built on shadows and loyalty. And now you are part of it. Irrevocably." Clara leaned into his touch, her heart thrumming. She had lost everything and gained an entirely new, terrifying, exhilarating life. She had witnessed his wrath, his brutality, his absolute power. And she had felt his profound, possessive devotion. There was no denying the dangerous pull he exerted over her, the sense of belonging she felt in his arms. "I know," she whispered, her voice firm, resolute. "And I accept it. I accept you. All of you." A profound relief washed over Dante's face, a subtle easing of the ever-present tension in his jaw. His lips found hers then, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of acceptance, of shared burdens, and of a dangerous, undeniable future. It wasn't just passion. It was a covenant. He pulled her closer, molding her body against his, a silent declaration of his claim. Clara melted into him, no longer fighting the powerful current that drew her to his dark heart. She was his, and for the first time in years, she felt utterly, completely at home. "You are mine, Clara," he murmured against her lips, his voice a possessive growl. "And no one, nothing, will ever take you from me again." He held her tighter, a fierce, unwavering promise. "But first," he added, a glint of dark amusement in his eyes, "there's someone I think you need to officially meet. Someone who needs to understand the new order of things." He pulled back, his gaze intense. "My capo, my consigliere, the architect of my empire. He awaits us in the private dining room." The scent of blooming jasmine and old marble filled the air, a delicate counterpoint to the powerful, reassuring presence of Dante Volcab beside her. 2 years had unfurled since the tumultuous night Clara had been arrested, 2 years that had reshaped her world into something she never dared to dream. Mia, vibrant and full of life, was thriving. Her experimental treatment, aggressively funded and meticulously managed by Dante, had sent her illness into a sustained remission. She was not only attending her dream art school but excelling, her laughter echoing freely through the once stifling halls of Clara's apartment, now a spacious, sunlit haven in a better neighborhood. The shadow of fear that had once haunted Clara's eyes had finally lifted, replaced by a deep, abiding contentment. Clara glanced at Dante, who stood with her on a terrace of his sprawling penthouse apartment, overlooking the sparkling New York skyline. His profile, sharp and powerful against the twilight, still held that dangerous edge, but his eyes, when they met hers, were pools of dark, possessive affection. He had just finished a phone call, his voice a low, commanding rumble in Italian, undoubtedly dealing with some intricate, unseen detail of his empire. The world still whispered of Dante Volkov's connections, of the shadows he navigated, but for Clara, those shadows now provided an impenetrable shield, a fierce and unwavering protection for everything she held dear. He turned, his hand reaching for hers, his touch warm and firm. "Everything is in order," he murmured, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "Mia is settled with her art project. The gallery is quiet. It's just us." His eyes, dark and intense, held hers, and Clara felt that familiar, exhilarating thrum of connection. He still saw her, truly saw her, with a depth that no one else ever had. "Clara," he began, his voice dropping, taking on a weight that made her heart quicken. He led her to a secluded alcove, surrounded by fragrant jasmine, and knelt before her, one knee gracefully touching the ancient marble. He didn't produce a glittering box. Instead, his gaze, raw and utterly devoted, was her only treasure. From the moment I saw you, fighting for your art, desperate for your sister, I knew you were mine, he confessed, his voice husky with emotion. You are the light that cuts through my shadows, the only peace I have ever known. You taught me to want more than power, Clara. You taught me to want a future. A legitimate one. With you, he reached into his jacket, pulling out a small, velvet pouch. From it, he drew a single, exquisite black diamond ring, set in a band of white gold, dark and brilliant, mirroring his own complex nature. Marry me, Piccola. Be my wife. Let me claim you, entirely and forever. Let me be a father to Mia. Let me protect our family with every breath I take until my last. Tears streamed down Clara's face, hot and real. This wasn't a proposal born of desperation or manipulation, but of deep, unyielding love, spoken by the dangerous, devoted man who had saved her. Yes, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. 1,000 times, yes, Dante. He rose, sweeping her into his arms. Their kiss the promise of forever, a blend of danger and devotion, passion and peace. The black diamond, cool against her finger, glittered with their unique story. Their wedding was a private affair, held 6 months later in a secluded, sun-drenched garden overlooking the Hudson River. Only a handful of trusted souls were present. Mia, beaming as the flower girl, scattering rose petals with unbridled joy. Patricia, now the fiercely loyal operations manager of Volkov Arts, shedding happy tears. Anthony Ritchie, their steadfast lawyer, raising a glass with a knowing smile. Clara, radiant in a simple, elegant gown, looked into Dante's eyes as they exchanged vows. I promised to see you, Dante, she began, her voice steady, beyond the shadows, beyond the whispers. I promised to be your anchor in this wild, beautiful life. And I promised to stop in the rain for you, every single time. Dante's grip on her hand tightened, his eyes glistening. And I promised to be worth stopping for, my Clara. Every single day. I promised to shield you, to cherish you, and to build a future so strong, so legitimate, that Mia will only ever know the pride of her name. You are mine always. Their kiss as husband and wife sealed their unconventional bond, a testament to love forged in fire and darkness, yet shining with a light all its own. Years flew by, a tapestry woven with art, laughter, and an unbreakable love. Volkov Arts and Acquisitions flourished, becoming a beacon of legitimate excellence in the art world, thanks to Dante's sharp business acumen and Clara's unparalleled talent. Clara, now the acclaimed lead curator and head of restoration, saw her name recognized globally, her exhibitions drawing praise from critics and public alike. She no longer merely survived. She thrived, her artistic spirit fully unleashed, her confidence soaring. Mia, a brilliant young woman, graduated from art school with honors, her own future bright and boundless, unburdened by the shadows of her mother's past. She had, with fierce devotion, accepted Dante not as a replacement for her father, but as her own cherished dad, the man who brought constant security and quiet strength into their lives. He taught her poker, took her to exotic art fairs, and listened intently to her burgeoning artistic theories, a loving, though still dangerous, father figure. One crisp autumn evening, as Clara, Dante, and Mia sat on their penthouse terrace, watching the city lights ignite, a comfortable silence settled between them. Mia was sketching in her notebook. Dante had his arm possessively around Clara's waist, his gaze fixed on the bustling cityscape, but his attention entirely on his family. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, utterly content. It's perfect, she whispered, a sigh of pure happiness. Dante pressed a kiss to her temple. Not perfect, Piccola, he murmured, his voice a low, possessive rumble. But real. And ours. He tightened his embrace, his words a final, sacred vow, echoing through her soul, sealing their destiny. Forever. Mine. Sometimes our greatest strength isn't in avoiding the storm, but in finding someone who'll stand in the eye of it with us. Clara's journey reminds us that true worth isn't diminished by past scars or desperate circumstances, but forged in the fire of resilience. Her fierce devotion to Mia, her unwavering integrity, showed Dante a light he never knew he needed, a love powerful enough to transform his dark world into a sanctuary. You, too, deserve a love that sees your struggle, cherishes your spirit, and protects your heart fiercely. If this story spoke to the hidden strength within you, or ignited a belief that love can heal even the deepest wounds, please let me know. Like this video, subscribe for more tales of fierce romance and unwavering loyalty, and comment below with "I am seen" if you believe, like Clara, that your story is just beginning. Together, let's celebrate the power of being truly seen and undeniably loved.